Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Injustice Podcast. I'm your host, David Greenwald. For the past 10 years, we've operated Vanguard court watches in California, including San Francisco, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. Our goal? Expose everyday court injustices, and now, more broadly, shine a spotlight on injustices in the entire criminal justice system, in the form of wrongful convictions, police and prosecutorial misconduct, and mass incarceration. This podcast hopes to take it a step further and highlight criminal justice reform on a national level.
Everyday injustice.
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Juliana Drous, who is one of our honorees at next month's Vanguard Awards Gala, October 19th at the Bank in Sacramento. Welcome to our show, Juliana.
Oh, thank you. Happy to be here.
So tell us kind of, what got you into being an attorney and what kinds of cases you've worked on.
Boy, that's a long story because I'm rather old, but I grew up in a working class family, but I was always interested in trials as a kid. I grew up in Mount Holly, New Jersey, and I would actually, in high school, go and sit through some trials, but I never thought I could be a lawyer. Back in the 60s, for girls going to college, you could be a social worker, nurse, or a teacher. So it wasn't until I got out in the work world and I was actually a social worker that I was encouraged actually by a judge to go into law because I was constantly getting cases in court for children who were in foster care who weren't being taken care of. And, coming out of the 60s, I was always was really concerned about social justice. And I've been lucky enough to be able to do the kind of work that I've wanted to do. I started practicing criminal law in 1980, and I was in a fantastic building with some fantastic lawyers. We were all doing our own cases, and they were all criminal defense attorneys. And got a lot of support, and everybody was in the National Lawyers Guild, and it was still in the 70s. People were still very politically active. And I decided what kind of practice I wanted to have. And I was lucky enough. I got married to a wonderful person, Joel Kirschenbaum, who worked on death penalty cases in his whole career. Another, great work. But he worked for the state public defender where he had a decent salary and with health insurance and all of that. So in my private practice, I was able to do the kind of work I wanted to do. So if cases came in where, most of these cases are not paying cases or they're appointed or low fee, but it's the best work. It's the most interesting work I think you can have as a lawyer. So I was in the lucky position to be able to take them, it's not like we didn't like the money I would make when I would make it, but I had more shoes than anybody needed. So I was able to get into the work that I really wanted to do. And as I got into it, how I get my cases are largely through the prisons. Being one of the lawyers on Geronimo Pratt, and that's other cases, other people in prison would contact me and say, I need your help too. And the cases that I thought had merit, I would take, and ended up having a practice that I really enjoyed doing.
Well, you mentioned Geronimo Pratt. So curious, kind of tell us about that case and your role in it.
That was a fascinating case. And I think one of the things about that case and comes up in this work often, is that you get to work with other very good, interesting people that's really fun to work with and people who are really committed. And on Geronimo Pratt, the credit for that case, there are people who never got the credit that they should get. Bobby Bloom, for example, he was a lawyer in New York who came to California. I don't know if you know him or not. In New York, he did Black Panther cases. He did big cases in New York. He came to California. He decided to move to California, and he took that case out of the basement because it was going nowhere at the time, and he got that going. And one of the most wonderful things that he did is he brought Jimmy McCloskey on. Do you know Jimmy McCloskey? He runs Centurion Ministries. It's this
Oh, yeah.
fantastic work out of Princeton, New Jersey.
Right.
And Jimmy McCloskey, with his incredible credibility, was able to get fantastic press in LA. And that got that case rolling and moving towards where it ended up freeing Geronimo Pratt. I wrote the petition and I was there writing for the motions, and it was in the background doing a lot of the research and writing on that case. I did not present anything in court.
I
The
didn't
person, the
realize
people who presented it in
McCloskey.
court were two fantastic lawyers with Stuart Hanlon and Johnny Cochran.
I didn't realize that McCloskey had worked on the Pratt case.
Without Jimmy, who I have the most respect for, it wouldn't have happened. I can say that without any, doubt whatsoever. He's an amazing person. I don't know if you've ever met him.
I haven't met him. I've read his book though.
Well, and after that, Jimmy, when I would want to get Centurion Ministries involved, instead of Centurion Ministries coming in, he would support me in my work and send me some funds to get investigators and that sort of thing. Just an amazing, amazing person.
So how'd you get into working on wrongful conviction cases?
Because it was the kind of work I wanted to do. In doing criminal defense, there were some cases, quite frankly, I didn't want to do that I was not totally comfortable doing. For example, child abuse and rape type cases. But the thing about wrongful convictions is there's no ambiguity. You're doing the right thing. When you believe somebody is innocent and in prison, you want to get them out. And so it's as simple as that.
Yeah, we work with a lot of people that are incarcerated that shouldn't be in prison, both because they're innocent and sometimes because they've just been over sentenced.
That's yeah. No, that's really a good point. Because when people ask me how I can do criminal defense, how can I, represent people who might be guilty? There are too many innocent people in prison, but I think the bigger problem is actually the ridiculous sentences people get and the unfairness of the system. It's to make sure that people are treated fairly and don't get more, that first of all, we have too many people in prison. There are people who are in prison who should be out just getting services. And I think that that's a major issue that people need to understand. The people on the outside who ask you, how can you be a criminal defense attorney, who don't understand what criminal defense attorneys do?
Yeah, there's a perception out there that criminal defense attorneys lie, which they're not allowed to do, to get their guilty defendants off. And, most of the time, defense attorneys know, to what extent their client has done what's accused. But what often happens is that what they're charged with is far broader than what they actually did. And so most of the time, you're not trying to get an innocent person off. You're trying to get charges knocked down for somebody who did something, but it's not quite as bad as what the DA is alleging.
You want to get to the reality and to the fairness, and you want to discuss the fairness of, that this person is overcharged. And one of the most wonderful things that have happened in recent years, and thank you to Kate Chatfield, is getting the new felony murder law passed. I mean, talk about overcharging and ridiculous sentences. I mean, for the getaway driver to get a life sentence when his past record is so minimal is it was totally ridiculous. And Kate Chatfield worked on that and ended up getting that wonderful law passed. I mean, I am so amazed with what Kate was able to do with that.
Yeah, that, has changed the life of so many people. In fact, next Monday here in Yolo County, we're going to have a retrial for a guy. He was convicted on natural and probable consequences. And so, because of that law, in addition to some other things, his conviction got thrown out. And now they're going to have to retry him. And I don't see how they're going to convict him because he didn't do anything. But, without that law, he never would have gotten a second bite at the apple.
No, that law has done a lot of good. When you're talking about defense lawyers lying, I have often encountered dishonesty and lack of integrity on the part of the prosecution. Right now, I have a case out of Sacramento that's totally outrageous. This young man was barely 18 when he was convicted of murder, and everyone knows he didn't do it. And when he was arrested, they took his phone. The DA put in a search warrant to get a search of the phone, saying that the phone will place him at the scene of the murder. Well, lo and behold, when the search warrant, when the results came back, he was 13 miles away from the scene of the shooting, or the phone was. And the DA then, an attorney was appointed to represent him and didn't put in that evidence, which is just astounding to me, which is a basis for IAC on habeas. And his reasons for doing that are just totally ridiculous. But anyway, what the district attorney in Sacramento then tried to do was say, well, the phone wasn't his. Well, they said the phone was his. They took it from him, and the phone in the log of the phone calls are to like his mother, his brother, all of his people. And then they had to get away from that, and then they concocted this ridiculous story that the murder didn't happen at 1 o'clock. Instead, it happened quite a bit earlier. And but the problem with that is that the 911 calls are all at 1 o'clock around one. All of the evidence is, people don't wait for half an hour to make a 911 call. And this man is still in prison. And it's just totally frustrating to me that we are having such difficulty in getting the right thing done on that case.
Now, is this the Nicole Carroll case?
Oh, that's another one. That actually, though, the good news is that she will be released on parole by the end of the year. I am so happy for that. But let me tell you about at that parole hearing, I have never encountered, what I should say is the level of, I'll just say it, the level of nastiness at that hearing from the one commissioner was just astounding to me. Asking her about her sex life and things that were totally irrelevant. But she is going to be paroled. They ended up doing the right thing. They had to. The person who planned the activity and the actual shooter were paroled because based on commutations of their sentence by Jerry Brown. For some reason, Nicole's sentence was not commuted, which I still don't understand. But she is going to be paroled, so there's good news on that case.
What's the background on that one? I know we covered it like 4 or 5 years ago.
You mean the facts of how she got convicted?
Yeah.
Well, basically, she was dating someone, this young man, and she ended up moving out of Sacramento. She moved to LA, And that relationship kind of sort of ended, and she was had a friendship with another young man. And when she told she's one of her parents are Vietnamese. The new guy that she's with was Vietnamese. The first boyfriend was Caucasian, was white. And she told her boyfriend how upset she was with the ex-boyfriend and that he had made some racial slurs against her father. So the new boyfriend was offended and wanted to. I think, he really liked Nicole, and he wanted to do something about it. So he got a group of his friends, and they went out and confronted the guy. And unfortunately, one of the friends happened to have a gun, and it was a spontaneous shooting. I don't know how else to describe it. And she got convicted of first-degree murder.
Wow. So what other cases stand out to you?
Oh, there are a few. Joel Alcox, he was in prison for 27 years, again, on a case where everyone knew that he didn't commit the crime. In fact, when we got the person who we knew committed the crime interviewed, his response was, that was a long time ago. Things are different now. He had since moved out of Santa Barbara. But the interesting thing on that case was when the case was over and we had finally gotten him out, and he was found to be actually innocent, and he received the $140 a day, which doesn't nearly compensate 26 years. But I got a call from a U.S. attorney who congratulated me on winning that case. And he said, Julie, now you have to admit we have a system that works. And I sat there and I thought, how can we say that it's a system that works when for 20 years, for years, we had to fight in court to say that we had the right and we had to be there and they should hear this case. We had to deal with procedural issues and the real question as to whether or not he was innocent and should be released. It took us almost 20 years to have the real issue addressed. Now, how is that a system that works? It's just astounding to me. I mean, were papers filed on time? Why did he wait so long before an attorney came on to help him? I mean, what does that matter when you have all these facts that he's innocent? It makes no logical sense. It's just amazing to me. And when I have spoken to high school groups and a few college groups, and when I tell them that actual innocence is not a ground for release on federal habeas, people are astounded. I mean, you can use actual innocence to get you through some procedural bars, but it's not an issue. You have to find a constitutional violation to get into federal court. And being actually innocent, for some God knows reason, is not considered a constitutional violation. I had a case out of Shasta County, where she was in prison for 8 years. Her husband was killed. And again, it was clear that she was innocent. And we finally got her out. That was a great case. And on that one, an allegation was ineffective assistance of counsel. And when she was up for retrial, the court refused to appoint. I asked to be appointed to represent her in the trial. They refused to appoint me and reappointed the attorney who had been ineffective, which, again, it ended up working out kind of, sort of, because it's one of these situations which happens a lot because there was a false confession on that case, and you have a hard time, especially in certain jurisdictions, convincing a jury that someone would confess to a murder they didn't commit. They made her a deal where she would be out of prison immediately and it would be over. And instead of taking the risk of a possible another conviction, she took that deal. And that's a way, the our system hates to admit that they make these mistakes, these horrible mistakes. They want to put out that it's a system that works, that we're having problems seeing how it really works that fairly.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel like people are starting to understand that innocent people will confess to crimes that they don't commit, either because they've been browbeaten by the interrogation process, or in some cases they're confessing to stuff because they're trying to take a plea deal, and they're afraid they're going to go in for a lot longer.
I do, but this brings up another aspect. All of these things are complicated. There's never one answer to any question. You know what I mean? And here, it depends on what jurisdiction you're in. I mean, you're much lot more likely to have that understood in places like San Francisco and Alameda. But when you get into other counties and other states, it's much harder, which brings up another aspect of fairness. You know, a lot of what happens in our court isn't dependent on fairness as much as luck. You know, where you're charged, what judge you get, what DA is on the case, all of those various factors, what attorney is. Most people who are charged with murder end up having appointed attorneys, either the public defender or someone appointed. So what attorney you end up with? I mean, there's so much luck involved rather than fairness, and that's kind of scary. That's scary.
Well, I think the stats are astounding. Like, if you take a look at death penalty cases, first of all, executions are clustered in a few states. Most states don't even execute people anymore. And then even in a state like California, it varies so much county to county. Like, San Francisco, they don't charge death penalty cases. We were in Riverside earlier this year. They set up 3 death penalty trials. It's like, hey guys, there's no death penalty in California. Why are you setting up death penalty trials?
Yeah, yeah. And I think if I haven't seen the statistics, but would be interesting to me to look at the 1437, the new felony murder law statistics to compare how those petitions are being handled county by county. That would be really, and I would really like to see that. That would be
Well,
really
we have
interesting to
some
me.
early data on that, because we had tracked the cases back in 2019 and 2020 to see what was happening. And so you have, counties like San Francisco had already cleared like half of their 1437 cases as of the end of 2020. And then, the rural counties, a lot of them only have 1 or 2, but most of those were getting denied almost summarily, which we didn't think there was any legal basis for those denials. I haven't tracked it in 2 or 3 years, so I don't know where it is now, but that's what we were seeing, at least in 2020.
Well, I think on the whole, I'm so happy I live in San Francisco. I think when you look at not only in 1437 cases, but just generally I mean, it's not to say that we don't have problems here. I mean, there's certainly issues here, to be sure. But I think that when you look at it overall, I mean, kicking out Chesa Boudin was outrageous, totally outrageous. I can't believe that happened in San Francisco, but it did, and it's a sad thing. But I think when you look overall as to what happens in San Francisco, there's a lot more acquittals. There's a lot more basic fairness, I think, than in a lot of places. And that's partly because of the mindset of the people in San Francisco.
Well, and there are a lot of resources in San Francisco. I mean, I work a lot with the public defender's office in San Francisco, and they have all sorts of resources at their disposal that most offices could only dream of.
That's thanks to Jeff Adachi. He did an amazing job when he was there. He really did in getting those resources. Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. The other thing is, um, some my skepticism sometimes gets the best of me. And I used to call behavioral health court before I had any real experience there as clappy court. I'd go in there and see people clapping, and I thought, how condescending, how ridiculous. But I had a client that I that I got in there, and I was really amazed to see, really happy to see that are really services for people and people going to bat for her. She was transgender, and the support that she had with the social workers who worked in the jail, the people who worked in that court, it was a very positive thing to see, and it worked. It worked for her, and I saw it working for a lot of people. And I'm really happy to see that courts, not just in San Francisco, but otherwise, are beginning to see courts recognizing that what people need are services rather than incarceration.
Yeah. I think more and more, there's a small core of people that are truly bad, truly dangerous. And when I say small, I mean tiny. I think most people in the system, kind of fall into three categories. One of which is they just need some education and some job training and to help them on their way. There's another group of people that, they're suffering from substance use disorder, and they need help to get off that. And then there's a large group of people that are simply mentally ill, and they don't need a jail cell. They need medical treatment, not to be locked in a cage. And once we deal with those three categories, the number of people that would be actually a threat to society and in prison is really small.
Yeah.
But we can't seem to get it through our head that it's actually a lot cheaper to treat people and to educate people than to lock them in a cage.
And then there are the fundamental problems. I have liked 99% of my clients as people. Perfectly, and some wonder goes from, ordinary people to wonderful people. But it's no accident. There are reasons why the prisons are filled with people who are from low income and poor. And the racial disparity in the prisons, and the kind of racism that we deal with often. Let me give you an example. Is like in federal court with trigger lock cases. I have represented so many young men who have had guns, about gun cases. And the problem oftentimes is that a large part of the time is that the system sees them all as the same. They don't individualize. And that's racism. I mean, I've had cases where a very, like you said, a tiny group, where a tiny number, I don't even want to say group, who are truly a danger to the community and don't have a lot of conscience and all of that. And if they're put away for a while, it's okay. On the other end, I've seen more where instead of being black and poor, if they had been white and middle class, they wouldn't be in court. They'd be going to Cal instead of going to prison. And then all the people in the middle, who are just ordinary people, with one kid saying to me, Julie, when I told him, we worked out a plea deal that he would never be able to have a gun. And he said to me, am I supposed to be the only person in my neighborhood without a gun? Which is another issue. I mean, again, all of these issues are very, very, there's not one aspect to it. These are very complicated issues.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to circle back because we're almost out of time, but is there a case that really stands out in your mind, as you look back on your career?
Well, of course, I would have to say Geronimo. That was such a great case to work on. Working with Stuart Hanlon it was a great case to work on. And right now, what's really on my mind is the case I told you about in Sacramento with the phone evidence, where he's still in prison, and it's hard for me to get that out of my mind until, I desperately want the right thing to happen. He's such a decent, good person, and he should not be in prison. And everybody knows that he's innocent. And those are the cases that stay with me. The cases where I can't get the right thing done are the cases that stick with me and make it hard for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's always those cases, and you're just like, can't do right by this person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing a little bit. I've enjoyed having this discussion with you, getting to know you a little bit. Since we've honored you, I realized that our paths have crossed a few times over the years, but I don't think I've ever actually met you in person.
Actually, I was at the dinner where you honored Nancy Skinner, who was somebody who really needed to be, was great to be honored. Yeah. And
yeah. Okay. I stand corrected. Well, thank you for coming on. This has been Everyday Injustice.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to be honoring Juliana Drous in 3 weeks. 3 weeks from today in Sacramento at the bank. You can come on our website and purchase tickets. You've been listening to Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com. That's Justice for George Powell, all one word, .com.